Alright, so this is what we call a phone. And what do phones make us sometimes? They make us addicted to them. Pretty easy, right? Well, what is addiction exactly? Addiction, as defined by the Oxford Languages, says the fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. Now, how does addiction work exactly? In a person who becomes addicted, brain receptors become overwhelmed. The brain responds by producing less dopamine or eliminating dopamine receptors, an adaptation similar to turning down on a loudspeaker when noise becomes too loud, etc., etc. Now, how do we become addicted to our phones in the first place? It's not like we exactly become glued to them the moment that we see them, do we? Well, it usually happens. An addiction can happen over time. It's not something that can happen immediately, but it's something that always happens over time. And in the case with our phones, usually it's one thing or another that has us addicted to it. Maybe it's a brand new game that we've discovered and that we started playing recently and that we just can't stop playing. Maybe it's us scrolling through social media, constantly checking out the latest things, seeing exactly what's new and what isn't. The point I'm trying to get at here is that addiction can be bad, to say the least. For example, in this case, our phones. If we become addicted to our phones and we become glued to them, well then that doesn't leave any space in our lives for anything else, such as our family, our friends, or it can even be other hobbies that we have, such as, well in my case, practicing piano or practicing drums. It's something so simple, yet so addicting. Moving on, we have attitudes. Now, attitudes, as defined by Google, a settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, typically one that is reflected in a person's behavior. Now that's a very key thing right there, behavior. So, let's assume that, well, you are talking to a friend. Now let's assume that you did something to that friend unintentionally without knowing, and you've made them upset somehow in some sort of way. Now, there is something called passive-aggressive behavior. What is passive-aggressive behavior? Well, to put it simply, passive-aggressive behavior is being aggressive to somebody but not being directly confrontationally aggressive to someone. One very famous example of One very famous example of passive-aggressive behavior that we have nowadays is something known as the silent treatment. Now, what is the silent treatment, you may be asking? Well, if you live under a rock, it's the equivalent to basically avoiding talking to someone specifically, and they make it not so obvious. For example, if you go up to someone and you start talking to them and they don't answer or they don't show emotion in any way, shape, or form, well then they are being passively aggressive towards you. Moving on, we now move on to the topic of prejudice. Now, what is prejudice? Prejudice, as defined by Google, is preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. Now, to bring up a personal example that I, prejudged, when I built my computer for, the second time, when I was upgrading it, I actually had an option between two different manufacturers that make processors. I either had Intel or AMD. Now, I've always heard that Intel was the best in terms of gaming, and that's what I was going to use it for. But I actually learned later on that AMD was the better choice, and I have it right here. I ended up making a mistake and I bought the Intel one. Intel ended up being slower, but since I had heard that this was slower before I looked at the numbers, I actually didn't know. So in other words, don't judge before you get to know something or someone. Lastly, we have parenting styles. Now, I don't know if you know, but parenting's kind of important. And it determines exactly how your kid's going to end up turning out because of your parenting. There are four main styles of parenting: authoritarian, authoritative, uninvolved, and permissive. And those basically vary at differing levels, but I have a bit of an example. Now, as an example for the different spectrums of parenting, the two extremes, I guess, we're going to take this water bottle. I drank some of it, I know it was full, but I got thirsty. This water bottle, when it was full, represented the strict expectations that parents have, authoritarian parenting wise. And then this other water bottle represents the uninvolved parenting. Notice how little water there is. This signifies the expectations that they put on their kid. They don't believe in their kid at all, and they don't put the expectations on them because of it. And that inadvertently leads to the kid turning out probably bad. Lastly, we have disorders. And it's just disorders in general, not really a disorder in specific. But the reason why I'm bringing this up at the very end is because I want to make fun of this. Not disorders, not people with disorders, that's not what I want to make fun of. What I want to make fun of, however, are the people that pretend to have disorders and that don't have disorders and that just do it for attention. Now, one of the most common disorders that people are faking, and one that was notoriously faked by a TikToker, was Tourette's. Tourette's usually involved something called tics. Tics are fast, repetitive muscle movements that result in sudden and difficult to control body jolts or sounds. So with that being said, it can be very easy to determine if someone is faking it or if it's real, because it's something that's usually developed from when they were young. So let's look at two examples, real versus fake.
I had a tic where I'd cough and clear my throat, so my mom took me to the doctor. They told her I probably just had an allergy, or probably needed to take my inhaler more often. She was always trying to help. I used to have bangs, and I used to have a tic where I'd shake my head, so my mom thought I was trying to shake the hair out of my eyes. So she took it upon herself to cut my bangs. The only problem with that was that she'd never wear her glasses, so we all know how that story ends.
Oh God! Moving on. Send me to Canada! I'll get her a new one. Wow! 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 Eat the burrito. No. One for you! Woo! Woo! Pew! 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 Mine. 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 Mine.
Well, that sure was eye-opening, wasn't it? Well, in conclusion, psychology actually isn't as boring as I thought it would have been this semester. In fact, it was actually pretty interesting, especially considering how small little topics can contribute to, well, everyday things in our life every day.